shall we move on to what is maybe the first parter of a much larger discussion? It's
Yeah,
not
we'll
even
see
really the
what we
first parter because we've talked about the subject before, but
right. I don't even know how to approach this. So I basically, this is my fault in a good way.
you get all the blame for it.
I did somewhat of my own dive, not into LGBTQIA. Let's just call it, do you want to just call it queer cinema just to keep it
Sure.
easier to
You can call it
say?
queer cinema. Yeah, I think as I don't know the terms that well, but I think that's what people call it.
I did a kind of a deeper dive into romantic queer cinema with happy endings. And as always, there'll be some spoilers here, even in knowing that some of what we talk about here has happy endings. But
Yes,
just
spoiler
because
alert.
you and I are interested in non-mainstream, I don't know what to call it.
Just something that isn't made by Hollywood and isn't made or largely
different
featuring white
stories,
males.
different stories and different
Yeah,
experiences. We tend to gravitate towards queer cinema. Anyway, we saw The Heiresses, which
so good.
is not. Yeah, I really like that. I saw Temblores. You didn't, but that had Rafiki.
Yeah, which is
So
on
we've seen
Criterion right now. Maybe. I don't
cool.
actually know when this is going up, so hopefully it didn't leave at the end of this month before this video was posted.
So we saw. So we've also seen a lot of non-romantic some of those are, some of those aren't, that we just talked about. But we've just watched a lot. And then there's like, the name is too long, so I'm not going to remember it. Melissa McCarthy. She plays the.
Oh shoot! I'm usually good with these. Never forget me. Never. You'll never.
This is fascinating to people, I'm sure.
I'm sure they're totally fascinated. I think it was like, what's her name? It was a woman director whose name I now forget, and she then went and made.
Can you ever forgive me?
Can you ever forgive me? And she also went and made that movie, the fictional version, or the fictional movie about Fred Rogers. That was fine. It wasn't as good as Can You Ever Forgive Me?
But and that's kind of its own beast in that. Oh, that's dogs barking. In that, I would not call that. I don't know what you call a movie like that, where it's based on a true story. It's based on a woman who was queer. It is not about her being queer, but she is, and her best friend is also. And so we've watched a lot of these movies now, and I made you read what I thought was an interesting article about Is There a Queer Gaze and What Queer Cinema Is by Bharadwaj Rangan.
Sarah had also literally had a list of movies that she wanted me to watch. I mean, we already have a list for each other, but there was a separate section of this list for movies that are queer cinema.
And I was really impressed because you watched 3 from that list yesterday.
I did. I only meant to watch 2, but then we threw Youngins on, and it was so short, and we were just sort of being lazy. I wasn't even really planning to focus that much on it because it was like, I probably should watch this. It's, just to make sure I get there. And it's such a light movie.
Yeah, it was really.
It's like Just Friends, but even lighter and with less happening.
Well, but it's a little more angsty, I would say, than Just Friends.
I don't know. The guy pours vodka or whatever into his bottle in Just Friends. That's kind of angsty. I don't know, maybe.
But and Youngins.
I mean, it's definitely more teenage angsty. Like Youngins. I mean,
Seeger has trouble with accepting himself, and I don't think that, and that's in Youngins.
Oh, that's true.
And
yeah,
I don't
okay.
think in.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we've got like 30 movies on this list, and we don't even know how to approach this. So
join us for this ramble on queer cinema.
Okay, so first question. Give me your overall impression of some of the movies I made you watch. Which ones stuck out to you? Which ones you really enjoyed?
So my overall impression is that we've already talked about this a little bit, and you've done some posts on Instagram that involve how, and not all of these, but a heavy portion of these are man on man. Movies.
And for the record, we've still missed some big ones. I know there's a couple really big lesbian films that I haven't
Plus, we did this. This is mostly the lighter stuff. Like we didn't do. This was Sarah's list, which means she was more interested in the rom
Happy
com type
endings.
stuff. Yeah, happy ending stuff. Right, you mentioned happy endings. So I like there is a much heavier focus on self acceptance, and usually it was repeating itself across all these movies that it's like one character has to accept themselves and the other character has to help them accept themselves, and like that's almost, I mean, it's not, there's exclusions, it's not every movie was that, but
Hmm.
Boys was that. um
Youngins, you mean?
Youngins, well, Boys is the American title. I couldn't find it under Youngins on the Roku. I had to look it under Boys, so it's known by both. Hawaii was that. um In and Out was that. It's not a rom
Yes.
com or a romance, but it technically is the same premise.
Maurice has aspects of that.
Maurice has aspects of that.
God's Own Country. It's hard because sometimes it's self-acceptance for other reasons.
Yeah, like it's not the same reason for self acceptance necessarily. It isn't. It
It
isn't.
wasn't always about accepting that they're gay.
Yeah. So and even but I'm a
But I'm a
cheerleader.
cheerleader, yeah.
Yeah. So that one has that too.
Because like God's Own Country, he just seems to hate himself
Yeah,
for a
that's a self.
lot of reasons. A
But
lot of reasons that have nothing to do with being gay.
yeah, it's almost like the being like the fact that he's gay in God's Own Country is kind of like an afterthought to the rest of his issues. Like
Yeah.
it's not that it doesn't figure into things, but it's like that's not why he hates himself.
Yeah. And Maurice, it's like there's some really interesting different levels of like, you know, he kind of accepts that he's gay, but if he's gay, he has to be gay a certain way. And also at the time, being gay got you thrown in jail. And
Yeah.
then like the way he looks, I feel like he accepts that he's gay. It's more just trying to figure out if Gabriel's gay or not is his. So yeah.
Yeah, that one's a little different. Like, so there's definitely that is one thing I noticed, and then which is nice because as you talk about, like one of the problems I have with rom-coms, I think it's the same that you have, and one of the reasons I probably have. I mean, I'm not as into comedies as that's something we know. I also just am not always into lighter movies sometimes the way you are. I
Hmm.
guess it depends on the light movie because I like action movies and those are not usually serious. They pretend they're serious. But is I lost my train of thought. I hate when I do that. I go on my own little stupid tangent that I don't need to go on, and then I forget what I'm fucking talking about. It's so stupid.
But we were
Um,
talking about kind of the tropes and the nice
Tropes,
guy
the nice
and
guy.
rom-coms and
Oh,
heterosexual rom-com.
heterosexual rom-coms is that it's usually like both characters have to change and like they both have to
Yeah.
be better people, and often because the way they write these scripts, it's like really only one person needs to get to be a better person and like the other doesn't, so it's like, you
Can
know,
I have a tangent to go. I don't want to interrupt you, but
go ahead. I was just I don't like those as much, and I like that in these one of the characters doesn't have to do that, so it's nice.
well, yeah, I've talked previously about the false equivalency issue that you get in a lot of hetero rom-coms where it's like one of them apologizes for literally ruining the other person's life and the other one apologizes for like not being honest about their feelings, and it's treated like that's fair. And it's like it's not though. It's
Yeah, it's
really
not fair.
unfair. It's like, and I'm working on this theory in my mind about Pride and Prejudice versus Emma.
Oh
And I
right, yeah, you've
think
told me. Yeah.
most heterosexual romances try and do Pride and Prejudice. And in Pride and Prejudice, they both realize that they have been wrong and that they need to overcome this. And there's no false equivalency because I feel like if they did this, and they do try and do it now, and Pride and Prejudice is really well written, like, and Jane Austen was great. And Elizabeth badmouths Darcy all over the place. Darcy is insanely rich and it doesn't matter. So while she needs to overcome these prejudices about him, she doesn't ruin his life by doing this because
Right.
he is very wealthy and she is not, and it is fine. Darcy, meanwhile,
Is very
falls in love with
prideful.
her.
Is very prideful.
Yes, and yes, and he falls in love with her and proposes to her, where he says that I love you despite the fact that you're kind of low class and vulgar, and she is not okay with this.
Yeah.
And he needs to realize that he's been letting his behavior, you know, affect things certain way, and so on.
Yeah.
And you read that book and you watch movies based on it, and you're not like, you know, like it's not equal, it's different, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, and most heterosexual romances, again, it's like, for one thing, it makes both of them assholes, and it,
yeah.
like, you like Darcy and Elizabeth even though they're flawed,
Yeah.
but people have trouble writing that, and when they try and write flawed people in these circumstances, I often don't like them because I think they're actually bad people. It does work for some people, so it's not just me. Okay, so then you have Emma, and Emma, Mr. Knightley is the nice guy because he's just nice. He's trying to help Emma grow up. A lot of people don't like he's way older than her. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Emma thinks she is a person that she's not. And once she realizes all these truths about herself, she gets love with Mr. Knightley. And that feels more like what we see in a lot of these, which is, but you also see it in some heterosexual
I mean,
romance.
again, these are not absolutes. We're not speaking in absolutes
I think
here.
Moonstruck, which is one of the great rom-coms, kind of follows that form, because Cher just needs to realize who she really is. He has to kind of realize who he is, but he does it in like the first half hour. And from then on, it's like he just loves her and wants to be with her. And she just needs to stop thinking that she's unlucky and get with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my rant. That's my rant about.
I think you're right about the Emma part being more the trend in the queer cinema that I have seen.
And I wish we saw it more. And again, it goes to, I think, some really weird attitudes about equality and pressures on women where we do weird things to try and make situations equal that aren't, or so on.
Yeah.
And Pride and Prejudice didn't worry about that because things were blatantly unequal and unfair. So you didn't worry about making things fair because they weren't.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Like, you know, so anyway, that is my rundown on that. And I think it is why I like queer cinema romances sometimes, because someone gets to be nice. Now, I think you like God's Own Country more than me.
Yes. Well, so does it surprise you that in this list that features mostly, you again, men on men, that like the ones that have been my favorite, and which might be God's Own Country, and like I did really like Princess Sid, though I don't know that I think it's the best or anything. Again, I'm not into the objective definitions of these. Again, a part of our earlier argument. Probably like my favorites are like the serious one and the one with women, as opposed to the ones with men. Though I did really like Canary, and the one that's might be my favorite of the lighter ones is But I'm a Cheerleader. I loved But I'm a Cheerleader. That was so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, does it surprise you that those are my favorites?
But you liked a lot. Like
I liked a lot of them.
Did you like Youngins / Boys?
Youngins is, I liked Just Friends, and it's the one that's closest in style and sort of feeling to Youngins. So I like Just Friends because there's a level.
But that's more the Pride and Prejudice story, because they're both kind of.
It is. That is one of the ones where it's not.
Yoris could be the nice guy, because Yad is kind of the one that has more trouble with. He's the one that breaks up and all that.
Yeah, it could be, but like they have more stuff with their mom. They both have these mom issues, and it's kind of weirdly plays into things, but it's not ever overtly said. And there's a lot of really clever scenes and humor. It worked. The humor worked for me in that in a way that humor doesn't usually. So count that for what you will. And I felt like I don't mind rom-coms that only have the rom-com and like no other subplots are like
Hmm.
like this is a it felt like there was stuff going on besides just the romance to me.
Hmm.
And Youngins has two plots in it to me, and this isn't necessarily like true, this is to me. There's the love between our boy and our other boy, our main character and bicycle rides into Lake Boy, and the subplot with our main boy and his family. And there's some stuff there, but they don't, there's like not that much dialogue and there's not that much stuff happening. Like there's just scenes where they're running and just scenes where they're playing and frolicking, and like I'm using frolicking to make it kind of silly, but like, and so there wasn't as much there to me. There wasn't as much like, oh, I was gonna say this earlier. Youngins is like teenage angst, but it also feels like teenage angst that it's just kind of like empty sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I look back at myself as a teenager and I'm like, there was real stuff there. Also, I was an angsty teenager at times and it didn't matter. And
Yeah.
like Just Friends is like more like young adult angst, like early 20s angst,
Right.
which I'm not as far removed from. And
Yeah.
like there feels like there's a little more there. So like
Yeah.
I enjoyed Youngins, but it's on that edge of like if the story was a little worse, like it would have been, less interesting. And Youngins, the filmmaking was still okay in Youngins, but it wasn't. They both have the look of, they have a digital look. They don't really have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
great.
Well, Youngins is actually made for TV.
Got it. Yeah, it kind
It's
of looks like it's just not shot like. There was a couple places where it's like, and here's a two shot of their heads, and I'm like, I don't know that we need to be this close to their heads. I don't, which is more
hmm
of a TV thing, it's smaller
Yeah.
screen and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like Youngins didn't look as good to me as Just Friends. Like Just Friends has this fun like drone footage that's sort of
Yeah.
incorporated into things, and like some really nice just like three people shots or two people shots. And it's like, it's not, Just Friends wasn't great cinematography either. It's
It's
not.
also, but Just Friends. The funny thing is, we're talking about Youngins and what was originally called Gewoond Vrienden, are both Netherlandish films.
Was Just Friends also
Made,
for TV?
yes, it was also made for TV.
Interesting. They did more with that one. Like again, it's not great filmmaking, but they did more with what they
Might have
had
been more
here.
of a budget. I mean, who knows?
Who knows? So yeah, I like Youngins. Here's my, if I'm going to try and narrow this down to something, which is like, in watching like all these things, and some of them, like I watched The Wedding Banquet, like with mom, which wasn't really something you suggested, but was something I
Yeah.
watched, and it's like there's an interesting range of comedy and romance where it's like I shouldn't be surprised, and it shouldn't be like surprising that there is this range because it matches the range of like what hetero romances I might have
Right.
seen or hetero movies. But it's like like I'm trying to like in all the different years that these movies were made, and like the decent number of the ones we watched were from the last 10 years. And it's like I wish, it's again that thing where I come to where it's like I wish, even though these funny and these comedies and these roms are not for me, like these aren't my kind of movies, like Gonzo and Country is, more my thing. Um, you know, But I'm a Cheerleader is weirdly my thing. Like I wish there were more of these, and like it's a little like I put Walk on the Wild Side on this list. I put Rafifi on this list on accident. That's weird.
Well, no, Rafiki.
I put
Oh, you put
Rafifi,
the Rafifi.
which is
The
the
Rafiki. Yeah.
heist movie, not Rafiki. And it's like it's we have this perception of at least a number of film people I know I talk to. It's like there's all, it's like the gay, the gays have to die at the end of the movie so that somebody learns a lesson, even if it's another,
Yeah.
queer person or it's a straight person. And these are all movies where they don't necessarily, it's just, they're just all movies. They're all people and they're all great things. So it's like, I wish this were incorporated into the narrative more. And Love, Simon, a movie that you don't particularly like, fits into all of these, even if it has his, and so it's like, I wish there were more of those, I don't know. So it's like interesting watching these, and like, I don't necessarily have a ton to say because it's not exactly my genre, but I just wish there were more people who knew more about these. Instead, it's like, I'm looking for these movies and where to watch them. And it's like, well, some of them, if they're the right kind of movie end up on the Criterion channel because they're a little more serious or they're a little more well thought of, or they might be on Amazon Prime because Prime has just a lot of everything. But then several of them, like, they're on these subscription services that are like very specifically oriented around, you know, queer cinema. And it's like, you know, of course I found them somewhere else, but it's like, I wonder too about the queer gaze, and like, I just think of it as cinema, and certainly queer cinema is a subsect of cinema. And I wish it weren't necessarily boxed that way sometimes, because it's like, Young is just the kind of movie that I think a lot of people would enjoy who aren't me, even if it's not exactly my kind of movie. I've rambled a little bit, but hopefully that all made sense.
Yeah, I mean, yes. What you're saying is like, I mean, it's interesting because there's a queer cinema and there is not a queer cinema. And I was thinking about this earlier because I was thinking about how you and I have had arguments about this, but there is an argument about, is science fiction a genre or a setting?
Right.
You know, because you have coming of age stories that take place in outer space. Like, I could take most non-sci-fi film or stories and change a few things and put them in space, and it would, you know, and it becomes that, you know, unless we're talking about hard science fiction type situations where it's, you know.
Yeah.
You know, we have My Life with James Dean.
Right, which you haven't mentioned. That's one of the ones I liked a little more, though the age difference gets me.
It's French, whatever. You know, but which also really is about, you know, which is about a lot of things at the same time as there's a romance at the core. And that would make me think about, you know, I'm not sure what I can think of it right off the top of my head as the equivalent in but there are like heterosexual romances, like that French film I saw recently that was poorly timed because it's all about connecting genuinely with people in person. You know, there are movies that kind of have that. And then there's like Maurice explored a lot of like platonic versus sensual love between two men, which makes me think of something like Sleepless in Seattle, which also explored whether or not, you know, you can fall in love with someone without meeting them, you know, so it has this bigger, you know.
Or even specifically a movie that explores friendship versus romance, which is When Harry Met Sally. I mean, that's the whole like thesis statement of that, is like men and women can't be friends or something, which is, I feel like that dates the movie, but anyways.
So it makes it kind of interesting. And that article by Bharadwaj Rangan, you know, kind of talks about, is there a queer gaze? Is there queer cinema? Does it need to be normalized? Not is there queer cinema, but should you normalize? Should it be mainstream? I mean, for my druthers, I wanted to use that word, there would be no mainstream. Like, we would just have infinite number of kind of niches that you could, and not as many big films raking in all the big bucks, but that doesn't seem to be how the world works. I'm
also curious from a practical standpoint. I mean, here we are still in the middle of COVID pandemic, that like what streaming, because who knows what the landscape looks like once everything opens back up against, whenever that might be.
Yeah.
And I mean, because whatever the studios are doing right now isn't working as far as trying to put movies back into theaters. You know, I've read some stuff and basically there's not enough money in it, it seems like. So like streaming is like where things are going. And I've read different articles that are kind of like, well, this allows for niche and independent things more. Like it incentivizes streaming services to have even more more content than they might already have, or to nicheify potentially. Like Criterion is its own kind of niche, and we subscribe to it because that's our niche. So like, I wonder from a practical standpoint, does that allow for more of a niche, more niche stuff like that to happen? You know, or is it something like Criterion is a niche for independent, for like hoity-toity, you know, film people like us, that then nicheifies within the service because they have, you know, a Black Lives Matter section. They have they
and then that becomes about a marketing thing too.
Right, and like marketing is, I even work in marketing, and I don't work in that kind of part of marketing, and it's like I don't know how you market that without it being kind of like icky, because it sometimes feels icky, like, oh, I should watch this because it's queer cinema. But of course,
Right. You
but
should
of
watch it
course,
because you like queer cinema.
right. And you should watch it like not, and like a lot of these services do it like, well, watch these because Maurice is a part of this package, which comes from
Right,
Merchant
but
and Ivory.
then
So
you
it's like,
risk getting into like a bubble where you only get things that you already know you like advertised to you, and you don't,
yeah,
if you're not. But I mean, I think that's the thing that happens anyway. People don't.
yes. But to go back slightly more to your point, this is like, I was talking to our mother about this, and I think she has a stronger sense of like men and women being different, and like, you know, I come from it from the perspective like, well, in my lifetime, yes, men, women, different culture, history, societal roles, blah, blah, blah. In a vacuum, I don't, in a vacuum, I don't think I don't think we're stuck to two genders. I don't think, there's your biological sex and not, even though that's tied up with gender, a lot of in today's world. So it's like, I don't, like, I think of like everyone, it's that whole thing. I think you agree that like everyone can do everything and everyone can be anyone. There's a higher percentage play for women filming something a certain way, or
Right.
queers. And I think there is a queer gaze that I think, if we talk about Hawaii and the amount of crotch shots in that movie and the way that or Call Me by Your Name, which is more well known, like, and also reminded me a little of Hawaii, reminded me of
directed by gay men.
yeah, and they both feature similar plots, and sort of like the way they filmed the male form is different, and I think it's even different than the way a woman might film a male form. I mean, they're much more close because they're closer, but it's also like anything. Even within the queer gaze, though, it's not like every time you see a male body in a queer movie, it looks the same because one queer man likes the way another queer man's body looks differently. My words are not working well here, but I think I'm making my point that like, it's, I like looking at things in a group way because I think that sometimes, especially in culture in the US, we sort of forget that there's like group responsibility and like group ways of looking at things as a community, so I like looking at like queer cinema and the queer gaze and all that. But I also, there's a community and there's the individual. Like Moonlight is a movie that I think looks at the male form in an interesting way. It isn't as sensual as, Hawaii or Call Me by Your Name, but I think it is still sexy, and I think it is still like, it might be a little more interested in like, it's not as focused on like male sexuality or like that, but I still think there's like a sexiness to it. But it's directed by a straight man, written by a gay man, but directed by a straight man. So and I don't know if the DP was straight or gay. I don't know about any of that, but like, so it's interesting. Like, and as far as I know, Moonlight is a movie that in general, the queer community seems to really have liked.
Right.
The queer community being mostly reviewers I know who are queer, or stuff that I've read.
Well, and that's like, I feel like it's worth talking about, but not worth defining too narrowly. Because I personally hate when I'm marketed to as a woman, because like I'm not gonna like.
Don't you want to go see Wonder Woman, Sarah? Strong woman.
No. But at the same time,
or Captain Marvel.
Like I notice the difference sometimes when a woman has directed something and versus a man, and not all of the films we watched were directed or written by people in the queer community. I know that Hawaii, like you said, Call Me by Your Name, Maurice, Watermelon Woman, Princess Sid. Like, I know for sure in all those cases there was a gay director, but I'm a cheerleader. But then there's ones like Kissing Jessica Stein, they're not gay. Love, Simon, not gay. Ones I'm not sure about. And then sometimes, and so I do start to feel like one of the things when I was watching Love, Simon was like, I don't think this is by a gay person. Like, and then it wasn't. And I hesitate to start doing that. And like, I don't want to go through because our sexuality is so complicated anyway. Like
gender, sexuality. All
Princess
of it.
Sid is about a bisexual young woman, and it's directed by a gay man. So there's even stuff like that. Like, I don't want to like go through and like checks and marks and
Yeah.
make up rules, but at the same time, it is hard for me to imagine a man who doesn't appreciate men sexually on some level making Hawaii. Like,
Yeah.
or Call Me by Your Name, because of the way it's done.
It's like the Bechdel test is useful and interesting in all the versions that we can now think of, the Bechdel test, but you don't want to stop your review or your critique at the Bechdel test. Like, if you stop at the Bechdel test, I think All About Eve is a movie that fails the Bechdel test, but
in the reverse.
In the reverse, I thought it failed. No. There's a movie that's like very women centric, but if you actually do the Bechdel test, maybe it's not All About Eve.
It's not All About Eve.
No, you're right. I'm confusing myself, but I know that there's like a movie I was talking to someone about, and I'm like, well, or like Revenge.
Yeah.
Revenge, which came out just a couple years ago. It's made by a French woman, but is like an English film. I don't know, or American film.
Anyways, French Canadian.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, like that fails the Bechdel test. But that's a movie that's very female.
Empowering.
Like, it's very empowering. It's very feminine. This case, very feminine focused.
Right.
It's about about this woman. So it's like, it's you don't stop at that. You don't stop at, well, this is a gay movie directed by a gay man. All right, we're done.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's
well, and I don't think that straight people
like Roland Emmerich directed Stonewall, and Stonewall is pretty bad.
Right. And I don't want to stop like straight people can't direct things with gay people in a gay, like none of that. But it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah. Well, I was even thinking of like Boy Erased, which is a movie that, was directed by a straight man, I think, right? I think Boy Erased was directed by. Am I thinking of Boy Erased, or am I thinking of? Because there's two movies that came out next to each other, and one of them I think was the one with Lucas Hedges.
Yeah, Boy Erased is Lucas Hedges. It's directed by Joel Edgerton, who is unmarried and has a brother. I have no idea what his sexuality is.
I'm pretty sure Joel Edgerton isn't gay, but I guess I don't know. So it's like, that's a movie where like either way, it's like it weirdly felt, and sometimes in some ways Love, Simon too, not as much, but like Boy Erased felt a little sexless in some ways, and it's like, and like, and like
and there's plenty of heterosexual romances that feel kind of sexless sometimes too.
Yeah, well, like the new Star Wars movies, like I'm just thinking of it because we watch Red Letter Media.
Well, those aren't romances, but they are weirdly sexless for the world
they have people who are supposed to be like into each other, and it's like, this is weirdly sexless.
People who give each other hugs.
Yeah, let's hug each other. That's very Disney of you, Star Wars. But I'm trying. I had one more point or one more thought about this.
And then maybe we'll wrap up because I'm getting low on battery and high on hungry.
Yeah, I've lost track of what I was saying, so it's fine. But yeah, so we should talk about this more. I want to watch some of the serious ones, but
yeah, I mean, we've watched so many, and we didn't even actually talk about God's Own Country at the end of the day, which I do want to know your thoughts on a little more. So I think we'll talk about this again next week. Probably.
Yeah, probably next week we'll talk about this.